We were supposed to have another speaker today, but unfortunately, the speaker couldn't make it, so we have an alternative speaker, which happens to be me. So today, what we'll do is we'll talk about the city of Ottawa and OC Transpo electric buses. You'll see as we go through the presentation that me and a team of people were instrumental in getting OC Transpo to try electric buses and to commit to deploying a large number of electric buses by the end of 2027. So you guys know me. I've been a KCOR member for some time. Always interested in environmental issues and have a science background and a business background. Always interested in talking about the technologies that apply. So let's get going and get into the material. Okay, so here you see on the right-hand side, the picture shows you actually two of the electric buses, and you see at the top there's the apparatus that's used to charge the bus. So we refer to that as catenary charging. It comes from the fact that in some cases there are trains that will charge with an overhead wire. But bottom line, that's how OC Transpo is doing the charging of their buses. So we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So we did this as part of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa, which many of you know that I've been the president of that organization for some time. I wasn't there in '82 when it was founded, but way back then, when it was founded, the idea was to promote electric vehicles. But at the time, given that there weren't many electric vehicles commercially available, most of the action had to do with converting gas vehicles to electric. So it was mostly engineers that tinkered with vehicles and did conversions. So since then, though, since there are commercially available alternatives, because they're already done and all that, they're less expensive. Excuse me. What we've done is we've pivoted to advocating for electric vehicles, not just light duty vehicles, but vehicles of every size. And of course, that includes transit buses and school buses, by the way, are another topic where we haven't done much work, but there's a lot of people activating or advocating for electric school buses all over Canada and the US. So we're 100% volunteer nonprofit, no affiliation whatsoever to the industry. We actually actively refuse any kind of sponsorship that would come from an organization that would have a vested interest in the transition. We fiercely remain as independent as we possibly can. Okay. So why electric buses? So the reason we started talking about electric buses, and this goes back to 2018, 2019. At the time, the city had a plan or was working on a plan to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. And when you look at the corporate emissions, so the emissions from the operations of the city itself, okay, not the population, not heating your home, not driving your car, this is strictly the emissions from what the city owns and the city burns in terms of fossil fuels. So about 50% of those GHGs came directly from OC Transpo buses. So that's a significant portion. And the city at the time had a goal of getting to zero by 2040, okay, which is only 15 years away. So obviously electrifying the fleet or finding some solution that didn't burn diesel was a big part of doing that. And if you look at the 125,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year, that comes from what you see in the background there, a double tanker. So they burn 2 of those a day on average and 1 a day on the weekend. So about 12 of those per week, okay? 40 million total per year. So transit is a good thing for a bunch of reasons. However, and I'll show you the specific numbers, the calculations here. OC Transpo burns 4 liters of diesel to bring the average passenger 100 kilometers, okay? That's a lot of diesel. Getting rid of as much of that as possible is certainly a good thing. So we started the campaign around 2019, and at the time, you may remember that There was all sorts of controversy about the LRT and the delays and the problems they were having and all that. So OC Transpo was very, very focused on the LRT and wasn't even thinking about electric buses. Okay. At the time, they had a fleet of 1,000 buses. Now they're down to somewhere around, I didn't recalculate the number, but it's somewhere between 763 and 800. So they've reduced the number of buses that they have, which is to us is an issue because if you look at the experience of other cities who have implemented light rail, what happens is they tend to require more buses because their ridership numbers increase, and you need buses to take people from home to the train and back, and the train to work and back. So that requires quite a bit of smaller buses generally. Okay, but they've reduced the number of buses. So OC Transpo was a laggard at the time, like I was saying, they're focused on the LRT, and we were concerned that electrification wouldn't happen anytime soon unless there was a push for them to do this. So before we settled on electric buses, we looked at what the other options are that are available out there, and essentially there's three options that outside of diesel, aside from electric, that are available. One would be to use compressed natural gas. Um, the problem here, despite what there were some buses in Hamilton that had a wrap that said that it was the Canada's first carbon neutral, I believe, bus. So this was a compressed natural gas bus, and if you know anything about any of these things, you know that it's impossible to have a carbon neutral bus using compressed natural gas. Their claim was that they were using renewable natural gas, so they weren't adding anything, but they did some double counting. Anyways, not to get into too much detail, but bottom line is the GHG effects of compressed natural gas are similar to diesel. So the emissions from the tailpipe are about 70% of what you get from diesel. And if you take into account the leakage in the production and transportation and processing of natural gas, then you get to about the same amount of GHG effect as what you have with diesel. The one benefit, though, is that it burns cleaner. So the other downsides, which we'll talk about a bit later, that affect the health of people, are lessened by using compressed natural gas. That's why, by the way, that Los Angeles had a large fleet of compressed natural gas buses a number of years ago. Now they're replacing them with electric. Enbridge obviously was pushing for this. They actually had a delegation at the Transit Commission telling the councillors how great compressed natural gas buses were. Okay, but not a good solution if you want to decarbonize. Hydrogen, we've talked about this before. I don't want to talk about it too much, but bottom line is they're more expensive to purchase. They cost twice to operate. And in the end, there's a bunch of issues with hydrogen that make it economically a non-starter, which means that trying to convince politicians to adopt hydrogen is really not going to happen. Okay, the economics are just so bad. The other option is something that they have in places like Vancouver. It's what is referred to as a trolley bus. So it's an electric bus that has a device that actually connects with wires on top of the street, and that's how they get their power. Okay, so we looked at that. There's a lot of people who find that the wires in that scenario are unsightly, and it's fairly expensive to put that in place. There's only one supplier of trolley buses, and trolley buses, which should be cheaper than diesel because they're simpler, they're more expensive than diesel even. So crazy, but that's the reality of the situation. There's also a lack of flexibility. So you have to have the overhead wires to be able to run the bus on a particular street. That being said, there are solutions today that have a smaller battery that would allow you to run off of the wires for some period of time. So trolley buses might be a solution to explore in the future if the prices make sense. Okay. So if we get to battery electric buses, so there's zero emissions, zero tailpipe emissions. They're quiet. Maintenance, we'll talk about that a bit more later, is about $20,000 less per bus per year. So and that's a conservative estimate. So what we've done, and I'll show you a website that we developed to document all our numbers, but what we've done is we've when we were looking at the numbers, we were trying to be conservative because we did not want to be accused of painting a rosy picture. And even with a conservative estimate on all these things, e-buses turn out quite well. So if you look at the fuel costs, so the electricity versus diesel, the assumption we had was 10 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity, which is probably twice what OC Transpo pays. Large commercial customers get very good rates, especially if they use electricity during non-peak hours. And OC Transpo, the plan is to charge their batteries on their buses mostly at night. So they would be using the grid when the grid is at its lowest utilization rate. So they'll get great prices for the electricity. The assumption for diesel was 90 cents a liter. I believe diesel is about $1.50 a liter these days. So there again, the assumptions are conservative. So the TTC did a study and they estimated they saved $60,000 per bus per year. Okay. Now they do run their buses a bit more than we do here on average, but still it gives you an idea of what the real savings are in the real world, right? So if you look at the numbers for OC Transpo, it's probably closer to $50,000 a year that they save on fuel. Okay. So if you look at the total for that, the total savings per year per bus are somewhere between $50,000 to $70,000. And that means over the 15-year lifetime. So OC Transpo, like most transit agencies, keeps their buses for 12 to 15 years. Long story, right now, the average fleet age of buses in Ottawa is quite high, but we might talk about that later, but there's some reasons why it's that way. But typically, OC Transpo will keep a bus for 15 years. And after 7 to 8 years, they'll do a refit of the bus. They'll rebuild the bus completely, do everything. And so they spend a lot of money doing that. And the bus then is able to work for another 7 to 8 years. So bottom line is you could save $750,000 to $1 million per bus over the 15-year lifetime, okay, with conservative numbers. So lower cost, better for health, and we'll talk about particulate matters and all that in a few slides. Zero GHGs, quiet. This is a win-win for the environment and taxpayers, and you would think this is a no-brainer and people would go for this, right? Well, not always. So so if you're talking about OC Transpo and OC Transpo's culture, OC Transpo is a utility, really, and they've been doing the same thing for a very, very long time. So they have a very slow to change and very conservative, risk-averse culture. Okay, so getting them to adopt something new is a bit of an issue. They were burned at the time. They were having lots of issues with the LRT, so that made them even more reluctant to try something new. They also had a project a number of years before that where they bought a whole bunch of hybrid buses. And it turns out that the hybrid buses, from their experience, didn't consume less fuel than the regular buses. Now, not to get into a rat hole, but what they did with hybrid buses is they put them on the long run. So the 95, for those who know the route numbers in Ottawa, the 95 that used to do Canada to Orleans on the 417 and the 174 and would stop at every highway exit. So this is a very long run, not many stops. So this is where a hybrid would shine less, right? A hybrid would do better if you have lots of stop and go, but instead they put them on these long runs and concluded eventually that they weren't saving any money, and maintenance actually was more of a headache than with diesel buses. So they actually got rid of all their hybrid buses at one point. Anyways, there's very much a not invented here syndrome. I see that a lot in other areas. So as many of you know, I was a consultant for 14 years, and I've probably visited 30 or more customers during those 30 years, and every customer thinks they're special in some way, shape, or form. But the reality is, Ottawa is not that special in terms of its needs for transit. But OC Transpo, they think they need to test everything, and the hybrid bus fiasco in particular is causing them to want to test everything before they adopt it. right? So, and they don't seek outside advice, generally speaking. So that's a problem, you know, and when you're trying to do something new and someone else has done it before, maybe they've got something that they learned that they could tell you, right? Also, at the time, there was a lot of FUD, so a lot of disinformation about things related to buses. So one big thing that the mayor was saying in particular is that Ottawa is a huge city. So, you know, we need buses with ranges of, you know, 600 plus kilometers because the city is so big and all that, right? So reality is though, at the time, Edmonton already had 60 electric buses and the service area, the OC Transpo, so where they actually run buses within the city is smaller than what Edmonton does. Okay, so there's really no reason why the size of the city is a factor here. If you look at average bus speeds, just to give you an idea of what the numbers look like, so depending on the run, it'll be 10 to 20 kilometers an hour, more or less. So if you think about that, you have a bus running down Baseline or Carling or Montreal Road during traffic hours. They don't move very fast and they stop very frequently. So the actual average speed of a bus is somewhere between 10 and 20 kilometers an hour, which is not much, right? So if you look at 10 kilometers an hour over a 20-hour day, which they don't run 20 hours, but if they did, that would be 200 kilometers only, right? So it's not, excuse me, it's not a huge amount. OC Transpo claims that the average run is somewhere around 250 kilometers. We Our numbers show that it's a bit lower than that, but anyways, for argument's sake, bottom line is the buses we have, they do over 300 kilometers of range, so that's not a problem. There's also an ability to charge them during a day, which OC Transpo is planning to take advantage to some degree. But you know, if there was an issue with range, they could charge them during the day and get more range out of them. The other thing is they've had software for a long time, and they've done a recent upgrade that's supposed to give them more stuff related to electric buses specifically. But every transit fleet has a mix of buses, and the OC Transpo has diesel buses that have a range of about 400 kilometers. Okay, and actually some of them don't have a gas gauge. Okay, so what do they do to prevent running out of fuel? Well, they have software that counts how much distance they expect a certain run to be, and figure out based on the capacity of the bus and the range of the bus which bus to use. So an electric bus is really just another bus with different characteristics. So it's very easy to use software to do the planning to make sure that you don't run out of charge. Okay. So what did we do? We started, of course, with a website, and at the time we were partnering with Ecology Ottawa and with the Healthy Transportation Coalition, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But we did a bunch of things with them, petitions, and we did actually a door-to-door campaign in Councillor Hubley's. So he was a transit chair at the time. We did a door-to-door campaign in his riding to try to put some pressure on him to move on this file. So anyways, the site is still there. It's plugincanada.ca, as you see at the bottom here. And I'll show you some of the data we have on that site. Okay, so in terms of GHG emissions, these are the calculations we did. So back in 2016, OC Transpo had lots of stats about their operations, and they've unfortunately removed them since. Possibly since we started using their stats to show what's happening in OC Transpo. But anyways, so total fuel in 2016 was 42 million liters. And if you look at the calculations there, we use a relatively small number of 125 tons per year. Now, given that we have less buses today, that number would be lower. But still, it's a fairly large number, right? And that's GHG emissions. So if you look at the efficiency, and I mentioned it earlier, these are the actual numbers and the calculations. So total diesel, again, 42 million liters. In 2016, OC Transpo carried passengers to 100 billion kilometers. Okay, so that's the equivalent of one passenger doing, 1 billion kilometers. So if you do the math, that turns out to be 4.1 liters of diesel to take one passenger 100 kilometers. And that's similar to what you would get with a Toyota Prius, okay? Now, that's burning diesel, not not gas, gas meaning a petrol, not natural gas. So the emissions related to burning diesel are much worse. And so you can see the transit, yes, it's better than most cars. And there's other factors to consider. There'd be more congestion if you didn't have buses, so that would consume more fuel and all that. But all in all, the point is transit is great, but it could be greater, right? If we look at the air quality impact, again, numbers from 2016, so it's about 93 tons of nitrous oxides that were released per year, about 1,000 tons of 2.5 particulates, and this is carbon. That 2.5 is particularly bad for health, and about 11 tons of PM10. So lots of pollution that affects air quality and affects your health, right? Now, one thing to note that we don't have on the, I believe we cover it elsewhere, but this section we don't cover it on the website, is that the practice on diesel transit buses, is that they have an auxiliary heater. They call those the Wabasto. They're like the Kleenex of these devices. So it's a generic term. Anyways, they use those powered diesel auxiliary heaters to heat the buses when it gets cold. Okay. In this particular case, OC Transpo is using diesel-powered Wabastos in their electric buses. Okay, so that means, among other things, it means that the average range of a bus is not very different in the winter than it is in the summer. Okay, because we're not using the battery to heat the vehicle, and actually in the summer we'd be using it to cool the vehicle. Okay, so how did we make all of this happen? This I think is very instructive in terms of what can we do for other things similar to this to push the agenda, right? So what we first started doing is we talked to the mayor. The mayor told us to talk to the Transit Commission. So, he's essentially brushed us off. But anyways, in the election campaign at the time, he promised that there would be an e-bus pilot. And Nova Bus from Montreal, they brought a bus to show in Ottawa. And you may remember that caused a bit of a problem because the bus was here during the election campaign and it wasn't quite kosher. Anyways, so he promised that anyway during the campaign, and he is a mayor that was very adamant to at least appear to meet his promises. So anyways, we worked with Councillor McKenney, who was they were on the Transit Commission at the time. And the way we started this is we got the councillor to issue a query to OC Transpo on the feasibility of using e-buses, because the way the Transit Commission works, the Transit Commission doesn't have any direct say into what OC Transpo does. They do it by proxy, essentially. So the idea there was to get OC Transpo to say that yes, e-buses would work well in Ottawa, and then we could use the economic and climate arguments to get them to actually buy some. Okay, so response was yes, they're feasible in Ottawa. So Mayor Watson and John Manconi, may remember that he was the head of the transportation division in Ottawa, which includes OC Transpo. They somehow found $6 million. We're not sure how, by the way, or where, by the way, to buy 2 short-range e-buses. Okay, short range was a bit of an issue for us because that means that those buses had relatively small batteries and needed to be charged regularly during the day. There's issues with that, and we didn't want them to use short-range buses. And the contract was sole sourced to Nova Bus. And we were concerned that they were setting up a pilot that was designed to fail because they were using short range buses. So talked to Councillor Brockington, and I'm making this a bit shorter than what it really was, but we eventually got Councillor Brockington to say that, well, why are we sole sourcing this? We should compete it. And our agenda was to get them to put criteria that would include long-range buses so that the pilot would have more chance of success. So he brought forward a motion that passed to run a competition to buy the buses. So they ended up buying long-range buses. And lo and behold, with the same $6 million, they were able to get 4 long-range e-buses and the charging equipment. Okay. So about 1.5 million total each for the bus plus the charging equipment. So OC Transpo, we recommended that they do a pilot. The aim of the pilot from our perspective was to understand how to integrate a different type of bus into their operation. So train the mechanics, train the operators, determine how to do the charging and all that stuff. What they did instead, they spent 2 years proving that these buses work in Ottawa's climate. Okay. That was a waste of time, really, because we knew they worked in our climate. Like I said earlier, Edmonton already had 60 electric buses on their roads and they work fine. Moscow, at about that time, Moscow already had 1,000 electric buses on their roads. So Moscow, a petrostate, right? They had 1,000 electric buses. They have 2,300 right now on their roads. So, if they work in Moscow, they're going to work here. So the initial proposal that they ended up doing after they did this, the pilot project and decided these things work in Ottawa, is they worked with the federal government, the infrastructure bank. The infrastructure bank actually called the city saying, "Hey, you should think about doing a deal with us about electric buses because there's all these fiscal benefits of doing that." So, anyways, the initial proposal was to buy 450 buses by the end of 2027. That included 100 articulated 60-foot buses and 350 40-foot buses. Okay. So the city was, OC Transpo was claiming that 60-foot buses didn't exist. We'll talk a bit about that on the next slide there, but that's not quite true. And they wanted to test them, which I believe they don't really need to. So what they did is they removed the 100 buses from the original project, but they did not replace them with shorter buses. Okay, and you probably know if you followed the news that there's been a chronic problem with a shortage of buses at OC Transpo the last couple of years. And this is, you'd think that if they were planning to have or forecasting a shortage of buses, that they wouldn't cut these or they would replace them with something else, right? But as I point out here, New Flyer Industries sell them. Nova Bus, they don't sell them here in North America. So by the way, in North America, there's 2 big suppliers of transit buses, New Flyer Industries out of Winnipeg and Nova Bus out of near Montreal. And so there's not very much competition, okay? But Nova Bus is owned by Volvo, and Volvo has articulated electric buses in Europe. They actually have multi-articulated buses that could carry, I think it's 250 people. So anyways, side detail here in 2024, although there was a motion that had said that OC Transpo would only buy electric buses in the future, they managed to sneak in buying 50 60-foot articulated diesel buses in 2024, buses which have not been received yet, by the way. So if we talk about the 60-foot buses a bit more, the picture on the top right is a picture I took at the EMC conference in Edmonton in November 2023, and that's a 60-foot articulated electric bus. So they exist. They were available at that time when they were making these decisions. And for another point, I guess, proof point, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, that's a picture I took in Milan in September 2019, and that is a double-decker electric bus. At one of the Transit Commission meetings, one of the councillors asked OC Transpo for some reason, not that they intended to buy them, but they asked OC Transpo whether double-decker electric buses existed, and the answer was no. But I have a picture here that shows an electric double-decker transit bus in 2019. Okay, and by the way, there's a lot being deployed currently in the UK. I was there last year and saw quite a few of them. So where am I here? So actually, the articulated electric buses have a big advantage over the other buses, the diesel buses, in that they have traction at the middle wheel. So those of you who've seen the articulated buses in the winter during slippery conditions, they tend to fishtail. and that causes all sorts of problems. They become essentially unusable, or very limited use. But with the electric ones, there's traction in the middle, so they don't have this fishtailing problem like the diesel ones have. So they're actually better than the diesel. So the next points here, I just want to go through them a bit. So we should need as many 60 footers because the long runs are there's much less of them, especially after stage two. We'll have mostly shorter runs. One of the arguments that was made at the Transit Commission is that buying electric, it results in longer delays for the buses. That is not true. It's simply not true. The manufacturers use the same assembly line to make the electric ones versus the diesel ones. It's just that when they get to put the power plant in, they put electric instead of diesel. So the delays are not any different. There were, like I said, 50, 60-foot diesel buses ordered in 2024. We'll receive the first of them, I believe, sometime at the end of this year. Okay. So like 2 years after they were ordered. So it's the same delivery delay as we have electric buses. Okay. And one of the things also to note is that they don't have a plan for past 2027. So I'm concerned that there'll be all sorts of other issues past 2027. Okay. So what does the final procurement look like? Well, the mayor had announced this as being a $1 billion investment, which it really wasn't. And given that they've removed 100 articulated buses, it's significantly less than that. But he wanted a number to look big, so he inflated it. And anyways, bottom line is that Ottawa will have 354 electric buses by the end of 2027. So almost half the fleet will be electrified, and the average cost is somewhere between $2 and $3 million per bus, including the charging infrastructure. We think that's very high, and I'll talk about some of the reasons why it's high. And this is one of the reasons here. They sole source the electrical work and charging infrastructure to Envari. Envari is a wholly owned subsidiary of Hydro Ottawa, which is wholly owned by the city of Ottawa. So they got their own workforce through subsidiaries to do the work, and Envari unfortunately tends to over-engineer stuff, and things end up being more costly than they really should be. When you look at numbers that we've seen, the charging infrastructure for a bus should cost per bus somewhere between $100,000 to $200,000. And in this case here, we're talking about a substantially higher amount of money. Okay. They did some retrofits to the existing Saint Laurent garage. They built an adjoining garage, or they're building it right now. One of the issues here is that they're putting all of the buses in one location. If you look at what the TTC has done, they did a pilot with 60 buses starting in 2019, I believe, and they distributed the buses at different garages. Okay, so why would OC Transpo take its oldest garage and retrofit it to put e-buses, right? A lot of other transit commissions, especially if they're implementing an LRT, the usage patterns for the bus changes considerably. So what they do is they tend to build what they call bus barns. So the garage, they call them bus barns, out in the suburbs, and put the buses there, right? So if you're going to redistribute the buses with new garages, you might as well build them in the suburbs and build them new and make them electric from the get-go, right? So one of the issues with retrofitting the Saint Laurent garage is that there's a space issue. So the space between the buses is very small. And because of that, they decided to mount the chargers, like I showed you in the picture earlier, on the ceiling. Okay, well, mounting that on the ceiling meant they had to reinforce the ceiling, the roof. Okay, so so it had all sorts of other implications. They also decided to install some backup power using natural gas. What I was telling them, and this is sometimes a hard argument to convey to them, is that they really don't need backup power, because if you look at a situation where there's a severe enough failure that they can't charge their buses, then we have bigger problems. So if you think about the ice storm, The last thing that was an issue is whether we could run our buses or not. And the reality is that not every bus would use up all its power every day. So even if you can't charge any buses, you would still have a significant amount of buses available that would have some charge that you could take advantage of. Okay. So here, this is from OC Transpo's website. So they issued a climate change master plan back in 2020, and that's where they talked about reducing greenhouse gases from corporate emissions to zero by 2040. The pilot kicked off in 2021, et cetera. So then they did the structural retrofits, like I said, with the garage. And then they put a year after, they started electrical infrastructure, and they've had some issues because electrical components are often difficult to get. Supply chains are still an issue. But starting in 2024, they started getting more electric buses. And right now, as of December 23rd, they had 36 in service. And if you look at the right-hand side, it shows that by the end of 2027, anyways, we'll have 354 in service. Okay. So this is what it looks like a bit more. You see the chargers that are hanging from the ceiling. And one of the reasons we thought they should use what you see on the left bottom side, which is a regular standard CCS2 combo. No, sorry, CCS1 combo port, just like the one you would have on most cars today. Standard technology, very easy to plug it in. But they decided to do what Edmonton actually did also, is to charge from an overhead catenary. And if you look at that, the yellow pieces you see there, those are all moving parts. Okay. And knowing what I know about reliability of stuff, the more moving parts you have, the less reliable it is. And those have to cost more to produce than the plug, right? So for those reasons, we thought it would be better for them to have charging that would be floor mounted, or they would ceiling mount the charger, but bring a cable down instead of bringing the contraption they have there for the catenary. Okay. So this is it for the presentation. So are there any questions?
Hi, Raymond. So I'm going to step in as host here. There are a couple of questions that are lined up, and I'm going to start with one of my own. Richard Vanderjagt here on deck. So if you'd like to get ready. What I'd like to know is, has Ottawa's City Council been getting reports that are being made available to the public about what's been going on planning-wise for these electric buses?
So following the 2-year pilot that they did, the OC Transpo produced an extensive report that talked about the tests that they did, talked about the range that they got with the buses, talked about a bunch of other things. So yeah, they did provide a fair amount of data. OC Transpo ended up working with NRCan to do more advanced tests. They tested buses with they had dummies that were water filled in place of passengers and all that to simulate the weight. They did a whole bunch of things with winter driving, so they tested them 12 months a year. And so it was a pretty extensive test, way more than I think they should have done. They should have been implementing buses instead. But anyways, yeah, they did report quite extensively. And the same, by the way, so if you look at the TTC did something similar, and Edmonton had done something similar back in 2016, I believe it is. So yeah, there's lots of documentation.
Okay, so that's regarding the pilot, but what about the ongoing planning regarding how they're going to do things like the bus barns that you mentioned, the charging systems and all that sort of thing?
So they have the Transit Commission. They've talked about their plans, but they haven't talked about anything beyond 2027. All right. So now they have by the end of 2027, they'll have all the charging infrastructure they need to charge 354 buses at the Saint Laurent location, and they'll have 354 buses. But that's all we know. We have no idea what the plans are beyond that.
So has there been public discussion, especially at council, of all the sorts of Well,
Um,
I'll call them small problems that you guys have noted. They're actually engineering problems, aren't they?
yeah, most of them don't make it to the Transit Commission. They don't. Um, it's it's you see the Transit Commission or committee, I should say, is really there as sort of like a board to provide some oversight, but not provide detailed recommendations, right? So they don't get into the weeds there. We had actually recount re yeah we contacted the city auditor to talk about the cost of the charging infrastructure and offered to have a discussion with the auditor, and she never reached out to discuss it. She did issue a report though, and the report said that what the city should do, or OC Transpo should do, is thoroughly test these things because we don't know if they work in the winter here in Ottawa, right? So the financial person made a technical recommendation and ignored the financial issues that we saw. So, anyways, there was lots of there as much as we made some progress with this project. There was a lot of frustration along the way, and there still is some frustration because the transit committee is talking about buying yet more diesel buses, and they last 15 years. So if they buy a bus today, they're going to get it in 2028 or 2029, and it'll be here past 2040 when they're supposed to be at net zero, right?
It's not a really bright picture that you've painted, at least in my perception. Okay,
Well,
we're
at
gonna
least at least a good portion of the buses will be electric, so they'll have made some progress, right? But I always like to see more.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so Art Hunter is on deck, and I'm gonna go now to Richard Vandria.
Thanks, Raymond. Excellent work. Very well done. And actually, thank you for stepping in. That was a great talk. Actually, quite enjoyed it. It would really do a lot of good for Canada, for Ottawa's climate, if we got people incentivized to take the bus. But right now, they find the bus services A, unreliable, and B, the fares have recently been increased. They've taken away student fares, and rather than teaching people at a young age that the bus is a good thing and it's easy to take, and where people are finding it hard to afford, and they find it's easy to they just find it easy to take a car. And I'm seeing on our local listserv that a lot of people are complaining about the reliability of the bus service. You
Mhm.
can't count on it to show up on time. So if we were to get the city council to put in more buses that show up on time as much as possible, then that would do a lot more good in terms of our climate. But my other question is, um, how long does it take to recharge one of these buses?
So the time to recharge is really dependent as much on the chargers they use as the bus itself, just like with your EV, right?
Yep, yep.
So they use 150 kilowatt chargers, and so it takes them 4 to 5 hours to recharge them if
That's
they
not bad.
if they're charging them from 0 to 100%, which they never do, right?
Yeah.
So the batteries are about 600 kilowatt hours, so they're quite big batteries.
We've got a good spot here as KCOR actually that we could lobby the city council to say, bring those fares down and incentivize people to get off the road. And it would be better for air pollution, people's health, etc.
Well, yeah, that's a very much wider issue, right? My opinion on it is that the fundamental issue is the city doesn't put enough money into transit. It's as simple as that. If they had
Yeah.
more money, they'd have more drivers, they'd have more buses, they'd have less problems. There's a number of things there. But if I was the mayor, the head of OC Transpo would have an objective to increase ridership,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, but to be fair to OC Transpo, some of the things that have happened over the pandemic have been terrible for the transit agency finances, not just in Ottawa but elsewhere. And
Hmm.
here, if you look at someone who works for the government and only needs to go in 3 or 4 days a week, if you do the math, it's cheaper for you to pay every day than to buy a pass. So what ends up happening is people aren't buying as many passes,
Yeah.
And people, it's very easy for them to say, well, today I'm going to save the $6 or $7 and I'm just going to take the car and pay the parking, right? If you have a pass, there's no marginal cost for you to go and take the bus, right? But to your point earlier, that I believe transit should be free, actually.
Absolutely. I agree.
And if you look at the overall cost of running a city, the city will spend, $200-300 million on widening one road, but the total budget for OC Transpo, the money that comes from the city, is about $300 million, right? So if we spend more money on transit, we could probably save a whack load of money on roads and the maintenance of those roads and all that, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I've been thinking exactly the same for some time that we should
Mhm.
make transit free
Yeah,
and just get people off the road.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, one last question. Sorry, Dave, if I can just, has there been any thought of using solar farms with batteries as another possible backup?
So actually, I forgot to mention that. One of the things we recommended is that they take the opportunity to cover their garage, especially at Saint Laurent where they have these buses, that they
Yeah.
cover them with solar panels, right? These are flat roofs that are ideal to put solar panels. But no, they didn't do that. And this would be ideal for them to charge the buses during the day, right? So the way OC
Hmm.
Transpo operates is about half the buses go back to the barn uh, during the day. So they're used during peak hours mostly. So if they had the large solar array, they'd be able to store that in the batteries of their own buses and get very cheap electricity to
Oh,
run the
yeah.
buses, right? But they decided not to do that,
Just think of
unfortunately.
the city, think of the savings in the long term.
Yep, yep,
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
yep.
That's not the only time that the issue of having the city put solar panels on its infrastructure has been raised. I raised it with one of the councilors and said,
Yeah.
you've got many, many kilometers of electric LRT lines, and I don't see a single solar panel on any wall or roof.
Well,
And it just makes no sense.
yeah, so if you go to Canada, sometimes when you don't think in a holistic matter, if I could put it that way, you make rookie mistakes, if I could say it that way. So if you you go to Canada, on the way to Canada, where they have the new train infrastructure there, they have some garages for the trains. You've probably seen them, right? So if you look at the roof, it's a slanted roof, okay, for at least one of them. Which side does it slant? Which side does it face? It faces north. Why not slant it the other way and put solar panels on there, right? But no, people didn't think about this for whatever reason. They put it the other way, and it's another lost opportunity, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Oh my goodness. Okay, so John Hollins is on deck, and I'm going to go now to Art. I would encourage anybody who's got another question, please put it in the queue.
Yeah, Raymond, it's an observation, and I'll turn this into a question at the end, but I walked the dog in Ottawa South LRT station, and I get there about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's quite a large parking lot. That's the reason I go there, because it's plowed and everything, and I can walk the dog around, and the dog can walk in the snow and do things, and I can stay in the plowed area. Um, but it's a very large parking lot.
Mhm.
And when I get there, it's 3/4 to 7/8 full. It's very busy. I look at the bus depot, and it's quite substantial as well. So the buses are, as it were, working out of hubs, just bringing them into the LRT. I presume some others are making their own way. So the actual routes of that the buses follow is probably quite complex. Well, I know it is because they have a map up of the bus routes, and wow, I was really impressed at where these all went, and somebody somewhere is certainly putting a lot of effort in getting these bus routes and keeping buses flowing and in the right capacity, etc. Now, but this brings up the rush hour versus the midday and how late at night one goes and how early in the morning do you start. Do you have any sense of this timing, particularly how Ottawa compares, say, to Montreal or Toronto?
Oh, that's a bit of a tough question. Now, Ottawa, one of the problems with OC Transpo and the way they've designed their network is it's designed to take people from the suburbs to downtown and back.
Yeah.
Okay, so most of the capacity does that, right? So if you're doing things like if you're my son working at the corner of Maryvale and Baseline, and you're leaving from Orleans, because the service is set up to go to the core, it takes them 2 hours to get there by bus, right? So my understanding and from what I've seen of other transit systems is they're not so, I mean, there is obviously a need to bring people to downtown core, but you look at subway systems in the cities I've seen, they're spread out throughout the high density part of the city at least. So it's more even, right? Now, if you look at buses here in Ottawa at night, we have buses passing a few blocks away. There's not very many people in them, right? So you got to wonder, to the Rich's comments before about getting people to use the bus more and all that, right? It would be great if we could get a lot more bus ridership for all sorts of good reasons. I mean, people go to a bar and they drink a bit too much. It's much better if they take a bus, right? All sorts of reasons. But that's more or less what I can say. There are people at OC Transpo whose job it is to plan the network and plan the frequency and all these things. So that, obviously they need to do that, right? They do make some good choices, but sometimes they miss. So there's a park and ride near here that is usually just about empty. Not exactly sure why, but it's just about empty every time I pass by. So yeah, it's not easy to plan stuff. And some of the stuff they've done, there's some stations down south that look like they're in the middle of nowhere, but they're in the middle of where there'll be stuff 5 or 10 years from now.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So,
Mhm. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I have Sabrina on deck and John Hollins, you're up now.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You asked a question, Dave, about reporting to council. I've had a bug in my bonnet about Ottawa City Council and Ottawa Transport almost since I arrived here, which is 50 years ago. The Ottawa Council is currently receiving, and you can find these on their website, a weekly report from OC Transpo detailing some of the management, the technical and management issues. Now, in my opinion, that's not the council's business. The council's business is to set the policies and the directions and the strategies. So we should change our entire council. But I'd settle actually for trying to find a mayor who has the kind of capability at the municipal layer that our current prime minister has at the federal level. I know I'm dreaming. Way back in, I discovered a report, Dave. I don't know why I was looking, but in 2017, I found a detailed report on OC Transpo's performance in 2016. Liters burned, passengers carried. Well, I believe the liters burned because I think there might have been an auditor somewhere down the street. How they knew to 5 significant figures how many passengers they'd carried. I don't put much weight on that, but that I came up, Raymond, with it was 4.37 liters of diesel per 100 cal, which is very close to your number.
Yeah.
So that's probably all right. Now, so I think we've got a fundamental problem in Ottawa, probably shared with other cities. These are big projects, and I think our city has proven more than once that it is not capable of delivering major projects. That takes me back pre-1997, I think, when the Federal Department of Transport ran YOW. If you ever traveled through it at those times, it was dingy, grubby, a most unpleasant place to be. And then the federal government had a brainstorm. It created a regional, or what did they call it? They called it an Ottawa International Airport Authority, which was a non-profit corporation, just like KCOR. and the first chair of that board was Jim Durrell, who was an earlier, and if you went back to Ottawa Airport sort of any time from 2000 onwards, you got the building maintained and run the way it is now. So my solution to this problem is to take the responsibility away from Ottawa City Council and create a new non-profit incorporated organization to run it for us. Then maybe we'll stand a chance.
So it's interesting you say that. So if you look at Toronto's airport, Pearson.
Sorry?
If you look at Pearson Airport, which is run by a similar authority, right?
Oh yes, they all changed.
Yeah. So Pearson has some of the highest landing rights, the highest cost for landing rights in North America, right? So they're not necessarily financially super responsible, right? If the landing rates are that high. So and the other thing I'd say is if you look at OC Transpo and the LRT in particular, okay, the LRT is run by a separate company, a private company, RTG, I think they're called. Anyways, so the consortium that built the original LRT spun off a company to run the LRT. Okay, I believe that model is one of the reasons why we had so many problems with the LRT originally. Okay, because the reason I say that is if you look at some of the failures they had. So we had an insider, by the way, at OC Transpo when all of this was happening back in 2019 and up to about 2022. And there were screening matches between the OC Transpo staff and the LRT people to do some stuff that needed to be done, like grind down rails in the corners to reduce the premature wear of wheels and all that. But from what I could see, the problem was this independent corporation was trying to minimize costs, and they didn't do anything they didn't have to do. If you're running the system, if OC Transpo is running the system directly, they could decide to reallocate funds to put more people on a problem or something much easier, and you don't have to. So if you want to do it with the current system, you have to, OC Transpo has to convince them to do it, and then they have to pay something more to do it, obviously, right? So there's all sorts of, there's not one throat to choke, right? So having separate responsibility, that causes a significant amount of problems. Yeah.
but I agree with you, Raymond. This has been run on a shoestring for as long as I know. That's not the way to run a major installation. You look after it. Yeah,
but the current and past mayor, their focus, and actually some of the previous mayors to that too, their focus was on minimizing tax increases at the expense of just about anything else. Right. So if you don't have a vision, and the current mayor is famous for not having one, and the previous mayor is infamous for not having one. You're not going to do the things that you need to do to develop a city from a long-term perspective, right? I mean, you look at some of the stuff with the LRT too. Why run an LRT where you already have a bus system to bring people to? You already have infrastructure that costs a lot of money to build. Why not build the LRT where you don't have those buses, right? So here in Orleans, the LRT is going where the bus used to run. Well, if they would have put it, if you know a bit about the geography of Orleans, all the development is happening south of Orleans, right? Because there's a river north, so you can't build anything else north, right? So they should have put some infrastructure south to support these new developments, but they didn't. They replaced, right?
And they didn't just make that mistake in the east side of Ottawa, where you and I live. They made the same mistake on the west side of Ottawa. Yep. The train will be running close to the river, not on Carling Avenue, where it would have passengers coming from both sides of the track. Unless people swim across the river from Gatineau, that's not going to work. Hey, I agreed with your point that putting all the electric buses in one location in the middle of the city, as close as you can get to the middle of this city, is a serious mistake. But that also means that there's if and ever they actually secure and run a few hundred electric buses, what's the electrical load when they're all charging? Does that need an increase in the transformer capacity in that part of Ottawa?
Well, actually, they're building a new substation specifically for OC Transpo at that location. So yeah, it does require a significant amount of investment at the back end to support that.
So you and I, as ratepayers and payers of Hydro Ottawa or Hydro Ontario, we're also paying a cost to make these electric buses run by having to put a new substation in.
Yeah, but so it's very hard to know what the numbers are and who's paying for what. But what I suspect is most of that cost has been borne by the electric bus project itself. Okay, so not by Hydro Ottawa. Okay, so I don't know if you know the principle. If you have if they need to upgrade your transformer to give you more power. Okay, they're not allowed today to charge you for the upgrade. Okay, they have to split the cost between everybody else that's using the transformer, so they can't charge you for the full cost of it. However, there's an exception where if you're the only user of that transformer, then yes, you have to pay the cost. Okay, so given it's a substation, I'm guessing that a lot of the cost was shoved on to OC Transpo. Now, if you look at it from Hydro Ottawa's perspective, this is literally millions of dollars of sales a year that they wouldn't have otherwise, right? And there's other opportunities there. I mean, the buses could be used for peak shaving. Don't want to get into too much details there, but there's a lot of things you could do that would benefit Hydro Ottawa. And given that Hydro Ottawa is owned by the city and OC Transpo is owned by the city, you'd think that they work together yeah.
I think so much. Hydro Ottawa is a joint management by province and city. The city
is not. No. Hydro Ottawa is the city alone. Yeah. Hydro One is a province, partly owned by the province.
All right. It may have changed since my day because one of my colleagues at the Energy Council of Canada served on the board of Hydro Ottawa. Hydro Ottawa. Okay. Thank you very much. You've done a wonderful job.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your answers, Raymond. So Sabrina has not come online. I'm going to ask her question. Beyond electrification, how much do behavioral factors and social norms influence bus ridership? And before you answer, I'm going to bring Richard van der Yagt back in a minute to make a couple of comments.
Okay, so So I'll answer it this way. So when we do EV advocacy for light duty vehicles, what we try to do is try to get people to substitute something that's burning fossil fuels with something that's not, with the least amount of behavioral change. The reason we do that, and it's kind of probably a weird way of saying it, but the reason we do that is because changing someone's behavior or convincing them to change their behavior is very difficult. And if someone, for example, has a private auto and they use it for most of their needs, it's difficult to get them to go to transit, which ultimately what we'd want them to do that, right? So we're not against transit by any means. We promote transit as much as we can, but given that we have a climate crisis and we need to reduce greenhouse gases yesterday, changing the behaviors takes a long time. So that's a longer term thing for us. So we don't worry about the behavior so much. We worry about substituting whatever is being burnt by something that doesn't need to be burnt. I hope that answers the question.
Well, so how much do norms influence ridership was the question. You certainly have gone around the edges of it. My take is that social norms influence it to a very great degree.
It does, but what I would say is so my wife is retired now, but she took the LRT and the bus for some time after the LRT was put in place. And what I could tell you is her feedback is that the LRT, by the way, her feedback is that part is very reliable. Okay, contrary to public perception, that's done all the time. It's actually quite reliable. The problem is the bus. So if you're taking the train downtown and you're coming to the local train station and you can't get a bus to get you home, or it takes 20 minutes, 40 minutes for you to get the bus, it's very, very inconvenient. And going the other way, well, you're late for work, right? So the big issue right now, from my perspective, is the reliability of the system. And until you could rely on being in a certain location on time, it's difficult for you to depend on that, right?
So in essence, I think what you're saying is it isn't just the behaviors and beliefs of the people who are potential or actual riders. It's also the behaviors of the people inside the system. Because if they don't care how long you have to wait for a bus, the system's not going to work.
Yeah,
but if they only get paid when the bus is on time, it'd make a huge difference.
Well, that comes back to what I was talking about, the incentives to increase ridership, right? There should be incentives for executives at OC Transpo to increase ridership, right? Now, again, that being said, there's only so much you could do with the money you're given. And I think the fundamental problem is a lack of funding.
Yeah.
I mean, OC Transpo has got a shortage of buses right now. They actually sold, okay? They sold in 2024, they sold 100 double-decker buses, some of which had not been through the midlife refit yet. So they were less than 10 years old. They sold them. And now they're scrambling. They just bought a bunch of older diesel buses to try to mitigate the problem short term. But so why did they sell these buses when any forecasting they would have done would have shown that they needed the capacity, right? So to me, it's all a sign of not enough money in the system, and
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So, Richard, and I think we're going to go to thank you, wrap up the program after this is done.
Okay, quick question. So you're talking about shortage of money, and there's also the carrot and the stick approach. In Singapore, if you were going to bring your car downtown, you get charged $35 plus additional taxes, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes very uneconomical to own a car and to bring it downtown in Singapore, as an example of one city that does that kind of approach. And if Ottawa wants to change people's behavior and started to charge people to go downtown with their car, then there's an additional source of revenue that you could then put into electric buses to change people's behavior and have more buses and become, have more reliable service, et cetera. It just becomes it feeds into the system. And eventually you have more people taking electric buses. And as you said, it's free. But then that's one way of getting revenue.
Yeah, now you're talking logic and rational discourse.
Well, we could lobby for this, with
We
the
could.
counselors.
Now, the council right now, from my perspective anyways, and maybe I shouldn't say this when it's being recorded, but they're very, 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 very focused on cutting expenses everywhere they possibly can. It doesn't matter what the quality of service is.
Especially in
It's
election
about,
year. Yeah.
right, it's about cutting or preventing increase in taxes and that kind of stuff. It's not about providing the service, right?
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate because I think we could do much better as a city. And I was in Singapore last year and I did take the subway there. And one thing
Yeah.
I'll tell you is if you compare the stations they have for their subways to the stations we have for our LRT, night and day.
Yeah, no kidding. I've been there.
They're
Yeah.
huge, they're well lit, they're fantastic. The ones we have are all small and some of them are already almost at capacity and we just built the thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but you have to have vision to,
Yes.
to,
We were there. Once you've
yeah.
been there, you've seen it and you know what it can be like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I'm actually going to turn this over to my wife, Jean, who's the former chairman of KCOR, to give you a thank you. In just a moment, I'm going to get the shares ready for her. No, not yet.
Raymond, I would like to say thank you very much on behalf of KCOR for also stepping into the breach today when we had some problems. I found this talk to be very timely, especially for those of us who live in Ottawa. But I can say quite categorically that the same problems are happening in other cities in Canada in particular because of the issues associated with funding. I know Calgary has a very interesting transit system, and the problems that they've been experiencing are very similar to some of the things happening here with respect to funding. So again, I'd like to say thank you very much for stepping into the breach, giving us this very informative presentation. And with that, I would like to say to those of you who are here, if you have not become a member of KCOR, please do so. There are many different styles of membership that you can have, and go to our website, kcor.com, to find out more about our organization. Also, please register at Stay Informed to get our weekly newsletter. You do not have to be a member to do that. You, again, do that on the kcor.com website. Also, we are a charity, so if you would like to donate money for us, that would be great. We would appreciate that very much to keep these wonderful sessions going into the future. So with that, I would like to say thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.